I'm back. I wanted to do something so that I didn't want everyone to see. I'm sorry.
Hello, Navina. Are you? Oh, there she is. Hi, how are you? Welcome. So far, Cecilia, we have 8 AC members online.
Okay. Who's missing? Who's missing?
We are missing. Hold on.
From the members.
We're missing Pilar. We are missing Julio.
Is Mariam here?
We're missing Mariam.
Daniel just wrote to me. I hope he's joining soon.
Oh,
hey, good morning.
There is Daniel.
Ah, perfect.
So we're 8. Hold on a second.
Javier is there. Alice.
Javier is on his way. Oh, Mariam is there. Hello, Mariam. How are you? So let me count them all.
Alice, 1 second.
Hello, Liu. Welcome. And hello, Pilar.
Hi. Hello.
We also say, we see you, we see you. So I think, hold on. We have 13. Hello, Julio, welcome. 14.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Hi.
Julio.
Funanani, how are you?
Thank you. Hey, Cecilia.
Hey, how are you? Good to
Good.
hear from you. I don't
you.
see you yet. Let me see.
Ah. No, wait. My video hasn't started yet.
There's Pilar.
Okay.
Hello, Olga.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Or afternoon. Someone in the morning.
Funanani, can you hear us?
I think my video was off.
Hey,
there you are.
There you
Welcome,
are.
Funi. Welcome.
Thank you.
Julio, do you want to share your screen with us?
For some reason, I cannot launch the video.
Hold on. Let me see. Correct.
I can't.
Daniel, we can't
That's
see
okay.
you.
That's fine.
Wait.
There you are. Thank you.
Julio, I'm going to mute you, yeah? Oh, no, that's Javier.
I'll try to leave the meeting and join again. Okay.
All right.
Naeem, your video is off.
Yeah, actually, I don't want to pollute. I'm smoking, so I'll put it on once I'm through with my smoking.
Sure.
This is netiquette. Sorry.
No.
So here you go.
There you are.
Let me start counting in Spanish.
Oh, you hear it.
You'll forget, Always count in your own language. Yeah.
How are you, Naeem?
Hi, brother. How are you?
Are you fine?
Yeah, just fine. We are in self-imposed exile. We are staying at homes, most of us. Yeah,
The
working
same.
from home.
Same. We are in
Yeah.
the prison.
But you know, talking of climate change, these few days at home has, you know, nature is picking up and everything is turning again and it's recuperating. Like the air is very clear. You can see the blue skies. So
My
let's hope.
country always under accident.
Now it's okay. Like the environment is recuperating. Yeah, it's getting back.
What
I
about
think,
the coronavirus in your country?
it's still under control. We have less than 1,000 cases. We have only about 7 to 10 mortalities. Hope we'll cope with it. Yeah.
Oh,
Sure.
we're happy.
Yeah.
Please save family and you, and it is very dangerous.
Yeah.
More than 2,000 people die in my country.
Yeah, I know Iran. Yeah, Iran is worst hit. Yeah.
Thank you, colleagues. Good day, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where we are in this time. I'm happy to see all of us again here to have this second day of our AC17. I hope everyone can hear me well, and if members are all in, I think we should start our meeting because we have 10 minutes past of our time. Today we will see agenda items 6A and 6F, which are global goal on adaptation and the preparation for the global stocktake. To start with the first item, or even before going to the first item, it is important to remind members and observers that no documents will be closed today. Documents will still open to receive contributions, to receive inputs, so we can all be assured of that. So in order, for the sake of time, I would invite Adaptation Committee members to consider the draft technical paper on agenda item 6A, which is document AC/2020/3. The document is talking about the global goal on adaptation and invite AC members to have its document open and its inputs prepared to be provided, while I will invite the secretariat to please provide the presentation on the background document around this agenda item. Please, the secretariat, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. And without further ado, in terms of the background to this draft technical papers, you may recall that CMA2 requested the Adaptation Committee to consider approaches to reviewing the overall achieving the global goal on adaptation and to reflect on the outcomes of this consideration in its 2021 annual report. You may also recall that the AC had included in its 2019-2021 work plan the preparation of a technical paper on useful information and methodologies for assessing progress and enhancing adaptive capacity, strengthening resilience, and reducing vulnerability to climate change, which in essence encompasses the objective of the global goal. So this draft technical paper is intended to provide input to the AC's consideration of approaches. You will note that the draft technical paper has three main components. Component number one is a review of scientific literature out there in terms of reviewing progress on adaptation. A second part is reviewing relevant examples of national approaches from developed and developing countries to assessing adaptation progress. You may have noticed that there is a wide variety of approaches, including using indicators, scoreboards, and formal knowledge exchanges, but also questionnaires and information collection cards. And finally, the third big aspect of the paper is a discussion of potential approaches to reviewing progress towards the global goal. The paper notes that all of these different approaches come with various challenges. Some are methodological, some are empirical, and we try to plot them on a scale from some which possibly pose less challenges to some which may pose more challenges. And eventually, the paper suggests for the AC to consider to reflect on the merits and limitations of those various potential approaches, to also discuss ways to finalize the draft technical paper, including any follow-up actions that the AC would like to see, or any revisions or inclusions of additional aspects. And finally, to start discussing ways to reflect the outcome of its consideration of these approaches in its annual report. Thank you very much, Cecilia.
Thank you very much, Annette. So after this presentation, which is very comprehensive and conduct us through the whole document that we have in our hands, I would invite AC members to provide their point of views on the document. I see in my list Nahim. Please, Nahim, you have the floor. We can't hear Nahim.
Okay. Thank you, Cecilia. Now you can hear me.
Yes, very well, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to point out that at Convention on Biological Diversity, we are in the process of making a post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And that was to be finalized in our next Substa meeting, which has been delayed to August now. But what I wanted to point out was that in our post-2020 global framework for biodiversity, also we are looking for the indicators, and climate change has been identified as one of the critical threats to the biodiversity. So we may be able to, after we finalize it, we may be able to use some of the experiences being used by Convention on Biological Diversity to incorporate in our adaptation scenarios here. So like we are trying to do with the Sendai and the SDGs, and you remember that two of the SDGs actually have Aichi biodiversity targets, like SDG 13 and SDG 14. They deal with the life on, in water and life on land. So I think some of the indicators developed there can also be used as indicator here to measure how the adaptation is working. So I think we need to incorporate whatever is happening in other conventions and try to incorporate that knowledge here as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Nahim. Very good contribution. So I also see the importance of having information from other instruments that can help on adaptation. On my list now I have Kazim. Please, you have the floor, Kazim. Kazim, we cannot hear you.
Wait a minute.
Now it's okay. You can go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, can you hear me? No?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Hello. At first, I would like to welcome Also, thank you for the last co-chairs, Pilar and Miriam. Also, congratulations to Cecilia and Alessandra. Thank you for Secretariat for preparing this technical paper. I have one comments and also one question to Secretariat. My comments is related to part 3 of the reviewing progress at the national level. I don't know, is it available or possible adding some experiences from developing countries can be added to this part, and also because of the most of the case studies from the Annex 1 countries, is it possible to increase, for example, specific countries and also other countries that this data is available for this purpose? Also, my question is about, do you know about indicator green climate fund? Thank you.
Thank you, Kazim. I wish the Secretariat would take note of everything that Kazim said, because it was connection was a little bit low, but I could hear. If not, Secretariat, please let us know if you, in case you want Kazim to repeat, please.
Please repeat. I would like to request from the Secretariat, is it possible to adding some experience from developing countries to the part of the 3 reviewing progress at the national level? Most of the case studies in this part are from Annex 1 countries. Is it possible? My comments, and also my question is about the indicators that proposed by GCF. Is it available or not available?
Yes, it's okay, Kazim. We took note. We took note. Secretariat also took note of your proposal and of your question. Then Secretariat will respond if there are indicators or input from Annex 1 parties, and then they will let us know. I have on my list now, Julio, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Cecilia, and thank you, and also let me join others in congratulating you and Alessandra on being elected our new co-chair. So thank you very much, and also thank you, Pilar, and also Marianne for the great job that they did in the previous term. So I just wanted to say a couple of things related to the paper that was presented. And I guess first thing is to appreciate the good effort and the great work that has been put into this paper. I have to say that it's quite detailed and very well organized. I think it contains a lot of information that is very interesting and critical for building an understanding of the complexities of understanding how to assess overall progress in achieving the global goal on adaptation. And maybe just a couple of comments. The good thing about working from home, I guess, is that you have the liberty to work on the actual document. And so I made a lot of comments and notes in the document itself. So I'm going to send it to you to keep a record of all the specific comments to the document. I think it's especially the first part. I think I found it particularly interesting and useful, in terms of by describing all the different approaches that exist to measuring the progress towards the global goal. I think it's a very interesting way of sort of navigating through all these approaches, and at the end of the reading, I think you start to sort of form in your mind the understanding of the different complexities and the methodological challenges and some of the trade-offs that you need to take into account in order to do this. And at least from my experience reading the document, I found that you know, it's a way of sort of confronting your own ideas when what you bring to the paper when you're reading it, and it was very useful for my own, you know, building of my own beliefs and approaches. It might be a little too early, I guess, to come up with sort of final proposals. And exactly, this is one of the things that I would be cautious about, because the paper sort of ends up making some assumptions, and I think it's important to foster that discussion within the committee, but at the same time try to prevent some potential criticism from some parties or some users of this document, because I think it's well, the mandate is fairly clear. It's to consider approaches to reviewing the overall progress made in achievement of the global governance adaptation, and I have the impression that as much as the document is very well founded and very well sort of grounded in concrete examples and lines of argument, I think it ends up sort of hinting into a direction of a potential solution for this difficult conundrum that we have in measuring the global governance adaptation. So I would I guess bulletproof a little bit more the document in that sense. But as I was saying, I have a number of comments that I have recorded in the document itself, so I'll send it to you for further processing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Julio, for this very comprehensive input on the document, and that we'll be very happy to take a look to the notes, and the secretariat will incorporate. Thank you, Julio. I have on my list now Pilar. Please, you have the floor, Pilar.
Thank you, Cecilia. And well, I'm tempted to say good morning. I'm sorry. Some comments from my part with respect to the document. First of all, to add my voice by expressing appreciation to the secretariat for putting up this document. I agree with Julio that is very comprehensive, and I think it's a very interesting state of art of where we are, and available literature in terms of the GGA. So it's a good compilation. And then I think that there are very interesting concepts that we could use as maybe as principles of work, and that is something I would like to take some time to reflect. First of all, for me, maybe the most controversial and one of the most important things that we need to take into account here is the concept of aggregation. So there is a lot of debate around this concept. Is it possible to aggregate? Is not possible? Is desirable? Is not? So I based on the definition of Later and Pringle, I was thinking of collating. So what are we collating? If we can agree that the GGA is a kind of aggregation, but it's just collating, is what we are collating the same in nature? How the three different features of the GGA can help us, maybe or not, to collate things that could be similar in nature. I really think that is something, at least I am very concerned about that. And another thing additional to the concept of aggregation is the concept of progression. I agree with many of the authors that appear in the text and in the document by expressing that GGA should be progressive. And that's the main nature, in the relationship between the GGA and the GST. If we don't think that, or if we consider that this is just one bullet from our part and we need to make it good just for at the first time we try to do this exercise, I think it will be a clear mistake. So we really need to plan this as an evolution, as a progress of different actions. So again, aggregation, progression. Another thing is the approach. I think that the approach should be qualitative and quantitative, that we really don't have and don't need to exclude one of the, or to choose one of the approaches so far. Of course, to respect general, let's say, context of the PA, national determination, and of course, also the national progression and evolution in terms of adaptation progress, because all countries are very different in terms of how they are approaching adaptation. And we really need, I think that's the spirit of the PA, it really respect that different in nature of the countries, and we need to respect that with our work. I also consider that our work should be based on, or could be based on different levels. Of course, national, subnational could be included too, sectoral, but not only, because sectoral many times, at least talking from my national perspective, sectoral approach and adaptation many times is really not enough, and it's not so good. So to take into account risk and vulnerabilities and ecosystems based in many cases. So there is where the differences, natural differences between our countries are so important and so interesting. Another thing is, so based on all these points that I'm trying to raise, is the importance of using a mixed approach. That it's something that the paper tends to suggest, I think. So I could really, I'm tempted to use something mixed. And two more things I could like to raise, because I left my comments and also some proposals in the last part of the paper that is in the collaboration area, so I will not go there. Just some reflections to start this conversation, is to remember which were the main conclusions of our experience in Japan, our workshop, where we try to compare and to have a very good discussion in terms of the relationship between the PA as a framework in comparison with Sendai, with SDGs. So there we have very good lessons learned. So I just want to raise that. And again, my last point is the importance of maybe also making some differences between the three features of the goal. We are not working a lot with the difference between the three of them. So I think that we could benefit from that too. So I will leave it from now. Thank you very much, Cecilia.
Thank you, Pilar, for the contributions, and for sure all that is captured in the document will be introduced. Now I have Cliff in my list. Cliff, please, you have the floor.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Or good afternoon. Good day. I co-chair. Good to see you this morning. I certainly agree with the comments earlier from my colleagues. But just to say quickly that this is not an easy task. This is a fairly new concept for a lot of people. So having said that, I am extremely happy for this technical paper, and really want to commend the secretariat for doing this excellent work. It has brought to me that this is a topic of great interest, based on the number of footnotes and the elements of the paragraphs that people have already started to look at this issue of a goal for adaptation, which is extremely important for developing countries, of course. The suggestions so far are good ones. Colleague from Pakistan spoke of links to what is happening with the Biodiversity Convention, which I think is always useful and would be useful. But to add others, the Convention on Combating Desertification, the Sendai Framework, and all of this is in the document, if you go in the paragraphs, are going to be useful examples and approaches that we will have to apply. I already seen, and I think the document, I need to go back through, I just did a quick look because it's very rich, that there are going to be linkages to NAPS. Obviously, there are going to be some linkages to the adaptation communication. I agree with Pilar that it's an evolution. This is the first try at this, but this is going to be a continuum over time, and certainly we will improve on our approaches and methodologies as we go forward. But we certainly will have to look at some of what parties are already doing and then to determine how to get more information from parties. I agree that it has to, well, the stock take is collective, so how to achieve that is going to be another issue that we'll have to look at when all the information come forward. It's going to be a lot of work for the AC itself, and the setback already from not being able to meet. We're not sure how long this will go ahead. The 2021 deadline looks a little bit close. It looked fine before, but yeah. So we may have to be thinking strategically how we may have to adjust our work plan, given all the other external influences that would affect that work plan. From my own thinking, and I agree with Julio, of going through the document and putting comments and inputs and sending and see how we can deal with this. A sector approach, adaptation is always a sector thing, water, agriculture. So we may have to look how to incorporate sectoral approach to how we do our adaptation assessment, see how it fits into this, and you may have to report sectorally that may be a little easier way. Agriculture, this is what we need. This is the goal for agriculture. This is the goal for water, this, etc., etc. Again, cost of spending and all of that goes into this. Short, quickly, Chair, and I know we're pressed for time. This seems that we may have to give it a little bit more focus and may require a smaller group. Certainly everybody should have an input, but we may need a little smaller group to take a greater, more defined look at that. And that would be a suggestion for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cliff. And I also think it is important to have a small working group that can pay attention to the document and incorporate everything that is being provided. So to move forward. Thanks again, Clifford. I have on my list now Funi. Funi, please, you have the floor.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I would also like to thank the Secretariat for putting together this paper. I think it has a lot of informative case studies on what countries are doing to track their own actions with regard to adaptation. And I think I would have to agree with Cliff that it's a very difficult challenge that we have. Just also building on what Naheem has said, one of the papers that were referenced in this document. I'm sorry, I can't see everyone. I'm not sure if everyone can hear me. Hello?
We can hear you and we can see you.
We can hear and see you.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. So I just want to say that South Africa on building forward the work that was referenced on this paper on operationalizing DGA. I think one of the paper was referenced that was developed by Kolisa and Sama. So we are working towards building further work towards that in terms of further elaborating what it would entail. And I think the paper will be very useful also for this work. And we are willing to share it with the secretariat towards the second part of the year. And then just minor input on the document. First of all, I think as African group, we championed the GGA.
I'm sorry, Funi, I'm sorry. Can you hear me, Funi?
Yes, I can.
Ronnie, some members cannot hear well Funi.
Okay.
Is there...
Funi, can you talk a little bit closer to your phone?
Yes, please.
To your phone, not to your phone, to your microphone, I mean.
Yes, please.
Say something. Say.
Can you hear me now?
That's very clear. Can you hear?
Hello.
What about the rest? Just by
yes,
doing this, that'll be okay. That you can hear.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, you can go ahead. Now it's fine.
Okay, so I was saying that as South Africa, we are working on a paper, building further on one of the papers that were referenced in this paper that the Secretariat has prepared on operationalizing GGA. And once we finalize working on that, we can share it with the Secretariat. And we think that it will be useful in informing our work, in coming up with the approaches. Can you hear me?
Yes, Funi, we can hear you very well. Now we can hear you very well, all of us.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so we will share that paper with the Secretariat. And then I was saying that, so from our understanding, the process of assessing progress towards the GGA, from the Africa perspective, understanding it is essentially assessing the direction of travel. That will then mean how we're doing in terms of the action, adaptation action, as well as support for those. And then in that regard, I think it's important that in the paper, when we decide on the approaches, we must also reflect the approaches that not only look at the action, but also at the support provided. And I think this is also reflected in Article 2 of the Paris Agreement, 2B to be specific. It's something that we can even add maybe in the introduction where we introduced the GGA. I'm sorry, it looks like the screen is frozen from my side, so I'm not sure. Is it? Can you still hear me?
We are fine. We're fine, Funi. We can hear you very well, and we can see you properly. That's okay.
Okay. Yeah. So the link with the Article 2, I think it's something that we also have to highlight from this document. That is action and support compared to what science is saying in respect of the 1.5 degree as well as the 2 degree. And I think in terms of the approaches, there are maybe other, they are the ones that are being reflected here. We see them as very useful for us to continue working on this one, particularly on paragraph 61, on paragraph 60, sorry. The potential approach that's referring to impacts and risk and vulnerability, we think that's something that it can be able to work because in the adaptation communication, or rather even in the adaptation communications that country have submitted or are going to submit to the UNFCCC, they do highlight the issues of risk and impact, and as well as vulnerability. So I think for now, I think I'm going to stop there. I see that on my screen. Cecilia is still, I don't know whether it can be able, but.
That's okay.
Thank you very much, Funi. We see you very well. We hear you very well. I don't know what is wrong with your side video, but we could see you and hear you. And thank you for the contributions. And we also would like to have your inputs on the document so that Secretariat can collect it. I have now on my list Navina. Navina, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Cecilia. Good morning, colleagues. Good afternoon, good evening to all of you. First of all, thank you to the Secretariat for providing this paper. It's really a good start for our work. And I think I agree with many things that have been said by colleagues before. So I will try not to highlight them and repeat them again, but just briefly mention them through my intervention. I think one of the most resounding things that that came across for me on this paper, and this was somehow said by Pilar and Julio, is that it's a bit too early for us to go in one direction. There are many directions we can go on. And I think there's a lot of things where we have had very fruitful discussions in the past. I will allow myself to say 10 years. And there are certain things that have not changed in the last 10 years, and this have not changed due to scientific and technological reasons, not to lack of innovation. So understanding that we got this decision now from the COP in Madrid, I just wanna, for people that have not been following AC as long or been able to partake before, we had a discussion on the technical paper that the Secretariat mentioned for 2021. And the reason why this paper was for 2021 and not 2020 was because of the interlinkage and to some other things that are happening now that are important factors for the discussion and the input to our work in regards to vulnerability, in regards to adaptive capacity and resilience. One of these, for instance, is the discussions that are still ongoing in terms of the adaptation part of the BTR. For me, and I think this is also very highlighted in the paper, and science backs this up, one lack of why we cannot understand the progress that countries are making in adaptation is the lack of empirical data. And the lack of empirical data is twofold. The first reason is that most countries do not have maybe capacities, maybe mandates, maybe funding, whatever the reason might be for the lack of it, but do not have national M&E systems in place, yet alone subnational M&E systems or municipality-wide M&E systems that allow to actually measure and assess the progress that has been done in adaptation and adaptation actions. When we talk about progress in adaptation, we cannot limit this conversation to project level or program level. It has to be really on either sectoral level if the country doesn't have the means to go on it, but from a technical perspective, the most effective one is on the subnational level, and the subnational level fits in back to the national level. Apologies. Sorry for that. And I think that's something that is highlighted in the paper or in the science in general, not necessarily only on the paper. Another thing that I can really agree with Kasim, you mentioned that there are not many examples from developing countries. And this is the second problem that we have right now with data. In the past years in the convention, reporting has not been obligatory for developing countries. And only countries that are more advanced in this kind of arrangements are able to put information forward. In the current setup that we have now post-Katowice, reporting, as most of the communication and anything in adaptation, continues to be something voluntarily that has to be nationally determined by the countries, and they do it in the way that better suits the country. However, due to lack of reporting, it's really difficult. And I'm really puzzled whether it is useful to engage in a discussion of assessing progress, because if we don't have ex post data, we don't really have information to assess any progress on adaptation. And for me, this is something that really worries me when we talk about the global goal on adaptation. How are we gonna really be able to pinpoint certain things if there is no ex post data, and we only have ex post data from developed countries or developing countries that are more advanced, and there are 10 very good examples of these countries, but the vast majority doesn't have them. So I would like to highlight like really the need there to discuss how to go about this. Furthermore, in terms of the discussion of aggregation, I like the words that Pilar used. You use collation instead of as a question if we want to aggregate or not. To me, to be completely honest, the way I see adaptation, if we talk about a country, it has to be implemented at the subnational level. And then it can be compiled at the national level. If we talk about the global level, we cannot really have any system of aggregation that will fulfill the needs of the countries, of all countries. It will minimize it to something really not essential in terms of the country is less vulnerability, is less vulnerable, has a better resilience, has increased its adaptive capacity. One of the examples, and I hope the Secretariat doesn't take offense on this, one of the examples of quantitative approaches that do not really answer this question is saying the number of countries that have submitted an app. This does not portray the reality on the ground if people are coping better or not with adaptation and the needs related to it. So I think in these terms, I would be very grateful exploring more qualitative options and outcome-based options rather than going into this level. And by this token, my question would be also to Kasim here, what did you mean by the Green Climate Fund indicators, noting that they're not done? For me, I wouldn't, like if we just put them there as an overall scope, I don't mind, but I'm not sure it has really a value because it's again a project level thing, and it gets us back to the same discussion we had on the past of project level interventions and not being able to look at the wider scope of the outcome level. I think I'm gonna try to limit my intervention because I'm talking quite long now, but I think from the Cancun adaptation framework and what has happened henceforth, we have really good opportunities to look, especially on national adaptation planning processes, and learn from there and try to incorporate this in the discussion. And I look forward to doing this also intersessionally if needed. And I will stop here to allow others time.
Thank you very much, Navina, for your points. We took note. It is important to remind that all information in the document is based on literature review, but please do not forget to provide the inputs in written so that we all can have access to that. In my list now, I have Daniel. Daniel, please, you have the floor.
Thanks. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much to the Secretariat for putting this paper together. As someone who's new to the Adaptation Committee, I felt like this was a really good overview of some of the discussions and challenges, not just with regard to this question, but some of the other general questions the Adaptation Committee focuses on. In my view, the paper overall was well balanced and laid out a lot of information in a very straightforward way, some of the challenges and potential way forward with regards to the global goal in terms of aggregation, the value of data at different levels, how to organize that data, the different typologies that might be used, and really appreciate the variety of case studies in terms of their geography and scope, how they worked in practice. It would be useful potentially to see some case studies that focused on subnational systems of monitoring, reporting, and data collection and assessment. So might be worthwhile for the Secretariat to reflect on that and try to collect some subnational work. there were some issues that we had with the paper. There was a strong emphasis on aggregation, but was very interesting to hear Pilar's concept of collation, and interested in hearing maybe more about how that might work in practice, and what that level, what that work looks like, and what level that is acted upon. Because it seems to me that the global stocktake is a collective goal. So that collective element may be able to be tracked through the collation of information, and that seems to be a good way to line the global goal and the global stocktake up through this concept of collation. I tend to agree with Navina's thinking that maybe with regards to this concept of collation, subnational information and data and assessments could be collated up to a national level, or collected to the national level and then collated in some way. And interested in reading some of the written comments and thoughts about that. Pilar mentioned this concept of iteration and progression with regards to the global goal and the global stocktake. I think that, as I think Cliff mentioned yesterday, it's important to keep open the idea of updating how we manage the global goal in relation to the global stocktake. I think it's probably would be challenging to prescribe an approach to progression and updating now, but it's something that should be part of the discussion, and should be a concept that we embed into these discussions and the global goal. So I'll leave it there. I look forward to seeing some of the written input from others and discussing this further. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for your contributions. Now I have Irina. Irina, you have the floor, please.
Sorry, Cecilia, I think Alessandra has first the floor.
I'm sorry, Alessandra. So, Alessandra, you have the floor, and I think after that is Irina and
Correct.
Mariam, right?
Correct.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Alessandra. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Cecilia, and thank you everyone for the very useful conversation. I have to say it's quite inspiring and indeed very interesting. I wanted also to thank the Secretariat for the technical paper. I feel it's a very good starting point and also came in a very timely fashion to help us move forward and think about how we want to address the mandates on considering approaches for the global goal on adaptation that we have received in Madrid. Perhaps the paper errs a little bit on the side of the academic when it comes to the literature review, but at the same time, I think it does present the approaches that are out there in a balanced and fair manner, looking both at the challenges and the opportunities. I think one important aspect that could perhaps be expanded further, and this also builds on some of the comments that colleagues made earlier on, is related to the integrated approach. I think indeed it's quite important that we look at how parties and countries and other actors report under the SDGs, for instance, the Sendai framework, indeed the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, and as Naheem suggested, also the experiences of the other conventions. Looking at synergies in reporting is one of the most useful ways, I think, to avoid unnecessary reporting burden for all of us, and in particular for developing countries. Other areas that you might want to expand include both the issue of sectoral indicators, and of course the challenges of the various sectors are difficult to aggregate and be relevant across the globe, but I think this is also a point that Pilar made. And maybe looking at subnational level as well. I think several speakers before me mentioned it. I think there are some very interesting experiences that we could look at, including from the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, for instance, and the 100 resilient cities or 1,000 resilient cities, I forget. In any case, I think there's some interesting approaches that we could learn from also in that case. I think going forward, we can build on the conclusions of the paper, which capture quite well the challenges and opportunities, but I do agree with Julio that it's important that we as members of the Adaptation Committee continue to have an in-depth discussion on the substance of the paper and the approaches it presents, so that we can take this work forward. Clifford suggested to have a smaller group taking forward the paper and the thinking around how approaches can be used to, for the global goal on adaptation. I think this is a very good suggestion, and if the other members of the Adaptation Committee agree to it as a way forward, I would be more than happy to be part of such a group. I think there are some things that we could reflect on, including how we could combine, for instance, the various approaches that the paper put forward, but also exploring further the idea of how collective progress can be assessed by using nationally determined metrics, and how the biannual transparency report and the announced transparency framework, for instance, could help and feed into this discussion. As Navina and Daniel were mentioning, it's important, of course, that we have reports from parties that enable us to take stock of progress. There are some key principles that I think we need to bear in mind as we address the issue of approaches towards the global goal on adaptation. Some of them are captured to different degrees in the paper, but I think they've also been mentioned by colleagues. However, in concluding, I wanted to emphasize them because I think it's important that we keep them in mind. And these include, of course, the fact that we need to be able to cater for a diversity of approaches, combining qualitative and quantitative information. For instance, as Pilar was saying, we need to be able to respond to the challenges and the opportunities of all of these approaches while ensuring we avoid additional burden on countries. We need to be flexible, not only to improve the way that in which we apply these approaches, but also bringing on board additional methods and instruments as we have new knowledge, new data, new expertise that comes to bear. And finally, also be iterative so that we can progress not only on the global assessment, but also support countries in enhancing action in a nationally determined way. Thank you very much. I'll stop here for the time being.
Thank you very much, Alessandra. For the sake of time, I will now move quickly to Irina. Irina, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Cecilia. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all. First of all, I would like to thank the secretariat for preparing this draft technical paper. It is quite comprehensive and well balanced. This paper is good starting point for further discussion how to finalize this paper. It gives insight that gathering, processing, and aggregating data coming from countries with different national circumstances are challenging to get general picture of adaptation progress. It's our task to give some guidelines how to make such a general picture. In this respect, a combination of different approaches could be useful for assessing the global goal on adaptation under the global stocktake. And so I propose to have a special space for analysis, how to combine different approaches, which indicators, general indicators, input, output, and outcomes could be used in this combination methodology. In other words, I propose to have short methodology how to combine different approaches. Second, my second comments relates to the questionnaire. Questionnaire can help to collect information on indicator if all countries are able to provide both qualitative and quantitative information, in particular relating to achieve and planned reduction of vulnerability, strengthening of resilience, assessment of effectiveness of risk management, etc. Not enough to have information on plans for adaptation and legal framework. We need to have a real assessment how countries deal with vulnerability, with resilience. And my last proposals is to support setting up smaller group to discuss different aspects of the issue we are now discussing, and somehow involve analytical centers and other institutions, for example, GIZ, to make an input in our work on technical paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Irina, for the very important and inputs. I have on my list now Mariam, and after Mariam, I have Alice and Liu. Mariam, please, you have the floor. I would ask AC members if you can, for now, be as much as possible precise, so that we can provide also some time for the observers and come back to another round of AC members. Please. Thank you. Mariam, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Cecilia, for giving me the floor. And I would like to join others in thanking the Secretariat for this very valuable technical paper and the review of the literature and the state of the art of the several approaches to assess progress towards the overall progress towards achieving the global goal on adaptation. But I would like to recall that the aim of the global goal on adaptation is to ensure an adequate adaptation response in light of the mitigation ambition. And currently the mitigation ambition is definitely inadequate. And let me reflect on the literature. I agree with many of the points that have been raised earlier, although not all of them. But it is very clear from the literature that we have some conceptual lack of clarity in terms of what exactly are we measuring progress towards. So for example, so we are tracking progress towards the global goal on adaptation.
Mariam? Mariam?
We lost Mariam.
Can you hear us? We lost you. Mariam, can you hear us? Nope. She's going, she might need to rejoin. Hold on. Mariam, can you hear us?
Hello?
Mariam?
Mariam?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you again.
Oh, I'm really sorry. So yeah, Zoom has just shut down and it's restarted on its own.
Mariam, we lost you, and if you can move a little bit back in your input so that we can hear again, because we couldn't hear from the last
Okay,
20 seconds, maybe.
So I have my connection bandwidth is low, and Zoom keeps just breaking and opening again. So I'll just be very brief here, and I will upload my comments in details. But I think that this technical paper is a good starting point. However, we still lack conceptual clarity on the elements of the global goal on adaptation that we are measuring overall progress towards achieving. And we still need to engage in preparatory work in that matter. So I mean, my Zoom also again is being, I don't know what's, okay, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you well.
Yeah,
we can hear you well.
I will provide my comments in detail, and let me now give the floor to the next speaker for the sake of time and the connectivity.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mariam. We could take note of that, of everything you said, and of course, we wait for your input in the document. Now I have Alice on my list, and after Alice, I have you. Alice, please, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Celia, for giving me the floor, and I'll try to be brief. I also want to thank the Secretariat for this, I think, very well written paper, which I have already shared with my national colleagues, because this will also be very useful for them who struggle to set up a better framework for how to assess progress on adaptation in Norway. So we think that this is a very useful compilation of, for instance, the scientific literature. And I support what others before me have said, that this is a very, very good start, and it will be too early to sort of dive into a certain direction at this point in time, that we should explore further mixed approaches. I also support that we should look at the balance of information, so that we have information from representative groups of countries or representative groups of regions, for instance, and perhaps also subnational data, like others have proposed. But we will still not be able to aggregate, we believe. And in collecting more information from other groups or other countries, I also think that the actual fact that there is lack of information is quite useful information as well, because that tells us about something about the complexity, and also if we could have information about why there is not very much information about systems set up, perhaps we could also have some information about those barriers. I support what others have said, that we need to look at primarily qualitative approaches. I don't think we can count like Navina allured to, that we can't only count NAPs or count support received, for instance, because that will not say us anything about how adaptive capacity has been enhanced and how resilience has strengthened or how vulnerability has been reduced. So I agree with others that going further, we should perhaps look at more examples and have more in-depth discussions and explore further on how sort of we could combine approaches, and also look at it in the light of the information that will be available to us, and also in light of the fact that I think Pilar alluded to, that we must think of this as an evolution. And I look forward to join that discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alice, for your input. Leo, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Cecilia, to give me the floor. And hello to everyone. Hope you have a good day. And I'm also want to firstly to thank for the Secretariat to provided this very excellent documents to us, and to give us very good starting point to think about the global goal on adaptation, these crucial issues. And also I learned a lot from the speakers earlier. That is a lot of very interesting thinking and ideas, and some of them I have the same feeling. And for the from the whole thinking of this document of these new things, we all know that the GGA is very new issues for all the peoples, and when we, as a logical thinking, that when we see a new things, we always to think, we always to wondering what it is. So that is related to the basic or the essential definition on the new things. And I think that is very important for us to go forward. So I think for the technical paper, maybe we need to firstly to discuss what's what should be involved into the basic or essential definitions related to the GGA, and to think about what's the natures that should be maybe they should be involved, which have been raised by Pilar earlier, and I think that is logically thinking on for us to think about these issues. And why I want to raise this issue, I think is crucial because when I look through this existing document, I found a lot some terms it's very confused to me. For example, the in the page 6, that is subtitle of 2.3, it's related to the metrics and the indicators. And also a lot of people have been raised these two crucial words, but there is difficult to identify what's the differences between these two words. The metrics and the indicators have been raised in the following paragraphs. Somewhere is metrics, somewhere is indicators, but they didn't to tell us what it is. So it's very difficult for the user or the readers to understand how to use of them with this technical paper or some technical suggestions. So I think that is we need to identify what's the keywords should be involved into this should be involved into the definitions, and then to clearly all of them, so that to describe the whole pictures on this issue. This is the first thing I want to raise. And the second thing is that I know that the cases from the national level is very important, and I also look a lot of very fruitful achievement from the national levels. But maybe we can use another way to assess of those cases, and then to give us more much more valuable things. For example, I think we can to identify the methods according to 3 parts. The first part is the data. The first part is the assessment approach, which may be involve different tools or different formulations from the scientific literature or the other report. And those things we can to give some simple case studies, so that we can know where it is and where it was be applied in the different level, maybe in the national level or sub-national level, or the program or the projected levels. So this is one this is the first part. And the second part related to the data, because we want to use different approach, but the data is the first step. We need to collect it. So the database, how to collect it related to the different approach. That is the second level, and to also to give some simple case studies. And the third part is the indicators, because when we have the approach and the data, we have some basic materials, and how to organize those materials, we can use the indicators to check of them their dynamic progress or the dynamic changes. And so for the different approach, they have the different indicators, maybe I guess, and those things to the indicators maybe for some approach they need the qualitative indicator, but maybe some approach they need a very specific formulation, so they need very specific quantitative indicators that will give very clearly method to identify what indicators should be involved or should be applied in some in some approach. That will be, so for this three part, it will be involve different cases for case studies as followed. And then the case study will be more accurate or more located into the very technical procedures. And thank you. That's all what I thought. And thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Leo, for this very comprehensive inputs. It will be good if your inputs can be provided in writing to the Secretariat. You have the collaboration area. We have the emails from Secretariat, so that all is taken into account. Thank you very much. I would now, if there are no AC members to provide inputs, I would like to provide some time for observers to contribute in the draft document. Ronnie, is there in your list any observer? I have Eunice.
Yes.
It's Magnus.
Magnus from SEI. And then we have Lindsay.
And Hannah. Hannah is the first one in the list. She.
No, the first one in my list is Magnus.
Magnus. Magnus, you have the floor then.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we do.
Thank you very much. And thanks to all of you. Thanks for letting us be observers here today. And thanks to the Secretariat for the technical paper. I'm going to make a quite specific point, and it's on the topic of transboundary climate risk. So how the impacts of climate change, but also the adaptation responses to climate change will cross national borders. And this is a topic that is rising up the agenda, but it is not mainstream for adaptation at the national and local level at the moment. So it is not covered at all in the technical paper currently. So our position is that a future draft of the paper and the AC's discussions on the global goal on adaptation should include mentions of transboundary climate risk. And SEI, along with ODI in London and IDRI in Paris, have established a new initiative called the Adaptation Without Borders Initiative, which aims to raise the profile of adaptation and climate resilience as a global public good. And this is very important in the context of the global goal, where global resilience is more than just aggregating or adding up the measures or resilience at a national level. So we'd like to put forward this topic as something that should be included in future discussions. And the Adaptation Without Borders initiative would be very happy to help convene dialogues on this topic between parties. We recognize that because it is a new topic, the discussion and technical background is often quite thin, that we believe a dialogue series might be quite helpful in bringing parties and other stakeholders up to speed on the issues and also the potential for the global goal and indeed the global stocktake to build on and to identify and analyze transboundary climate risks in work going forward. So we offer that and would invite any parties or AC members to contact us if you would like, or if you see a helpful role for us in facilitating those dialogues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Magnus. We took note of that. Lindsay, you have the floor, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, very well.
We'd like very much to thank the Secretariat for organizing this meeting despite extraordinary challenges. And just to say how moving it is to see so many familiar faces on the screen, considering the circumstances. We also thank the Secretariat for this paper, and we have one suggestion. we would encourage a deeper reflection on the relationship between the levels of mitigation and the challenges to assessing adaptation approaches in relation to different levels of temperature rise. And the IPCC talks about manageable and unmanageable scenarios. And in this way, it would help with this paper to better understand how challenges to measuring the global goal on adaptation are influenced in relation to example of a 1.5 temperature rise compared to a 3 or a 4.8 by 2100, which is the current projected level under the current emissions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. It is well noted. I now have on my list Hannah. Hannah, please, you have the floor.
Hello, dear colleagues. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Good. I would like to thank you for invitation for this meeting and also for a very good technical paper on assessing progress and adaptation. I'm coming from the secretariat of the Convention on the Protection and Use of Transboundary Watercourses and International Lakes, and its secretariat is hosted by the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. I am working exactly on climate change adaptation in transboundary basins. Therefore, my comment would be in line with the previous comment by Magnus. I would like just to say that the Water Convention provides a unique global legal framework for adaptation to climate change in transboundary basins and transboundary cooperation. And actually, we have quite a bit experience in this, where I have been working for 15 years in supporting this process in basins through developing guidance, capacity building projects on the ground and exchange of experience. And I would support the previous speakers that indeed adaptation covers different levels and a lot has to be done on the local level. But at the same time, if we take a transboundary perspective, it will help us to avoid maladaptation and to ensure more efficient adaptation. And just a question whether there is a plan to take transboundary issues into account while reviewing the progress in adaptation. And if there is such an opportunity, the Water Convention, of course, is happy to contribute with our knowledge and experience, and also with our experience on reporting under SDG 6, because like reporting under SDGs and cooperation with other international frameworks was mentioned. Thank you a lot for giving me the floor.
Thank you very much, Hannah. I now have Anne on my list. Anne, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, and good day to everybody, and thanks to the Secretariat for moving ahead with this meeting and also preparing this great paper. I thought it was an excellent overview. Just a very quick intervention and more to sort of position, I guess, IISD and then the Global Network that we're hosting as a resource in all of this, sort of responding to some of the comments we heard from some of the AC members for more examples from developing countries. Just to note that we're currently working with about 8 to 10 developing countries in establishing their own M&E systems and coming up with their own tailored approaches. Some of these are very much about trying to link national, sort of tracking national progress on adaptation and linking it to very subnational, even community level circumstances. So I know that these are very new experiences, and in some cases they might be untested. And but I think that there was a comment earlier from Navina saying that that these things are coming online. Eventually, we need to sort of be aware that even in the next year or so, we're going to have even a richer pool of experience to draw from. So just to say that if there's any interest in tapping into any of these experiences, we're here and we're very happy to contribute.
Thank you very much, Anne, and your contributions will be very, very welcome. I see there are no more observers asking for the floor, so I go back to the members. Is there any need of getting the floor again? If not,
No, there is
No.
none, Cecilia.
So I think we are all exhausted because we had a very hard and fruitful discussion on this agenda item. So we have one more agenda item to go. So it is because of the complexity of this issue of the global goal and adaptation. We all remember that Clifford proposed that we should create a group to work on the document. I see it as a very important proposal, and I would suggest that both co-chairs be part of this group. And I will leave the AC to decide how many members we think we could have in the group, so that we don't need to have all the members. Otherwise, it will not be a group, and we can discuss on the plenary. So I would suggest that AC members can propose themselves to be part of the group, considering like a limit. That's a proposal of 4 or 5 members, including Clifford, because he proposed it himself when he proposed the creation of the group. AC members, I give you the floor for you to talk about the creation of the group, please.
Sorry, Chair. You said, am I the one you're giving the floor to, Clifford?
Yes, you can be.
Okay, thank you. I certainly would be happy to serve on this task force. Yeah, thank you.
Clifford. Thank you, Clifford. I see Pilar on my list. I see Alice.
Cecilia, it's just a question, a procedural question. As you asking for a quick conversation on a possible group for the consideration of this?
Yes, Pilar. I see as important that we have a group to work on this agenda item. So if the AC agrees, I'm asking who wants to be part of the group, but we have to be aware that the group cannot be too large. Otherwise, it will not be possible to then accommodate other members in other groups that we may create for other agenda items, and we can focus on the document. So Clifford has proposed himself to be part of the group. I proposed both co-chairs to be included in the group. And we still need some more AC members for that.
Okay, if there is possibility, I would like to be part, of course. Thank you.
So we took note. Thank you, Pilar, for joining the group.
Cecilia, we have also Alice, and she wants
Alice,
to
yes.
give a comment.
Alice, you have the floor. Can we hear Alice?
Muted. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry for coming in. We live in uncertain times, so and this is a special meeting. And I guess that we have to, and there are quite a few new members, so I guess we have to, and because we are not now in a position to address the entire agenda, we'll have to have alternative modes of work. And I guess there are several groups that we might have to staff up. So perhaps we should not decide entirely to this on memberships on this group, because it is like a puzzle, because we need to populate other groups as well. So perhaps we should come back to that on Friday, tomorrow or Friday or something, and see it all in one connection. I said I would be happy to continue these discussions, but if we could have a sort of a day for this discussion on the next AC meeting, that might be sufficient. I think we should discuss it the entire AC as well. So I don't insist on being on this group, but I hope we will have more time to discuss it within the committee in more than 1 hour, like we've done today. Sorry for coming in again.
Thank you, Alice, for the suggestion. If the AC agrees, so we can have some time for reflection, and we can let the secretariat and co-chairs know about who wants to be part of the group. So is the AC? Silence means consent for me. So I think we have to give time for the other agenda item, which is agenda item 6F. So I will thank you all for the very fruitful contributions you made in the draft document. So I will hand over to Alessandra, my co-chair, to take us to the second agenda item. Alessandra, you have the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cecilia, for ably steering the discussion earlier on. It was indeed very interesting and useful. We'll now be moving on to the next item on our agenda for today's live discussion, which is, of course, connected quite closely to what we have been discussing in the first hour of our meeting. We turn to agenda item 6B, synthesis report by the Adaptation Committee on the information identified in para 36 of decision 19/CMA1, overview of mandates and context. I'd like to invite the AC members to have document AC/2020/7 open and ready for discussion. Could I please invite the Secretariat to give us an introduction to this paper that has been prepared for this agenda item? The Secretariat, please.
Thank you very much. As way of background, you may recall that Decision 19 CMA1 established 3 components for the global stocktake. It will start with an information collection and preparation phase, followed by technical assessment, and finally a consideration of outputs. As part of the information and preparation stage, the CMA requested the preparation of a number of syntheses reports and subsequent webinars. Some of these syntheses reports are relatively similar in scope. In particular, the one synthesis report on the state of adaptation efforts, experience, priorities, which is also to cover the adaptation efforts of developing country parties. And finally, an assessment of the support needs for adaptation of developing country parties. This report is supposed to be prepared by the Secretariat under the guidance of the co-facilitators of the stocktake. As you may recall, the Adaptation Committee is also requested to prepare a synthesis report with the assistance of the Secretariat. And this synthesis report is to look at information identified in paragraph 36 in its area of expertise. When you look at the sources of input, the paper identifies potential areas where the Adaptation Committee could provide its expertise in terms of the report. Then you may also notice that the timeline for the production of this report, and thank you to Alice for providing a first draft of the timeline, is the following. That in order to have the final draft ready for consideration by parties as part of the technical assessment, the paper suggests to start with an annotated outline by AC18, and then subsequently to develop a number of drafts with a final draft to be approved at AC21 in 2022, so that it is ready for consideration. At this point, the paper suggests for the AC to consider the scope of its synthesis report, considering the potential overlaps with other synthesis reports, in particular those by other constituted bodies, but also the main synthesis reports on adaptation, but also the overall effect on NDCs. The AC may wish to liaise with the LEG, the EXCOM, the facilitated working group of the LCIPP, but also the bodies dealing with support to ensure complementarity of the various syntheses reports, and to finally consider requesting the Secretariat to start preparing the report under the guidance of the AC, ideally as part of a small working group, so that the work starts and is ready by fall 2021. With this, well, with a final draft by February 2022, of course, I'm sorry. With those short introductions, thank you very much. Back to the co-chair.
Thank you very much for this introduction and for setting the scene for our discussion. I'd like to invite first members of the Adaptation Committee to consider the information included in the document and in the presentation by the Secretariat. We should also bear in mind the linkages that this has with other agenda items, not only the global goal on adaptation that we just discussed, but also the draft supplementary guidance on the adaptation communication we discussed yesterday, as well as the modalities for recognizing adaptation efforts of developing countries that we will discuss tomorrow in our live session. I'd like you to share, to invite you to share your views in particular on the scope of the synthesis report, as well as on the overlaps as pointed out by Annette, and consider the suggested step forward. I see that Kazim would like the floor. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Thank you, Secretariat. I would like to advise that the following topics related to the scope of the synthesis report get priority in AC synthesis report. First is the connecting adaptation planning at subnational and national planning process. Second, adaptation technology availability and accessibility by developing countries. And the third is transmission of adaptation good practices among developing countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these good suggestions, Kazim. Are there any other AC members who would like to take the floor? I see Pilar. Pilar, please.
Thank you very much, Alessandra. I provided my my written comments, but just to make some of them as quickly as possible, I will refer to the table, probably because it's easier to see the table in paragraph 5. So there I make some specific comments. Well, first of all, to thank the Secretariat for the good job. As I said, I have some additions. One of them is I read again the set of decisions, because I need to recognize that it's very tricky to see all the sequence. But after reading again all the sequence, I still think that there are certain issues that are missing in the table. So my proposal is to add, is not just the table, I mean, is of course the scope of the different synthesis report, what I am referring to, but I'm referring to the table because it's simpler. That's my baby that is talking to me. Well, with respect to the first column, that is the synthesis report from the Secretariat, my first comment is that we are excluding the synthesis report referred to 23C. I know this is a contentious issue in the negotiations, but at the same time, I'm trying to take it as a fact that many countries include more than two-thirds include adaptation components in their NDCs. So I really think that we need to have an extra column based on the other synthesis report that is based on 23C. And I'm confident that the Secretariat among themselves, because this is Secretariat synthesis report, mitigation team and adaptation team will be, as always, very efficient in order to talk among themselves and to see how to to collapse the information, the mitigation and adaptation information and the linkages between them. That is something very important that different AC members and observers raised during this conversation today. And we specifically have a report on the relationship between these two issues. So they are not just two boxes completely different, but are for sure related. Another comment that I have is in terms of the column of the Adaptation Committee. Again, in terms of scope, I agree that 36C, F, G, and H are important. At the same time, I would like to also raise the importance of B, D, and E. Again, I recognize that this could be contentious, but how to try to do our work while at the same time we recognize political issues, but we take action. So for me, the way is just to see how we can work, or which are, according to our mandates, which are the issues under B, C, D, F, and blah, 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 that we can work on. So it's not just to say, okay, I am not finance, I am not technology, I don't work with these, because we work with adaptation finance, we work with adaptation technology, we have a lot of linkages with our colleagues of the PCCV, the Tech, and CGCN, the Standing Committee, etc. So how we can do that and not excluding points that I think that are quite important for the AC to have a synthesis report that includes all the dimensions of adaptation. So that's my main point, that it's not just to pick and choose between the A, B, C, D, but it's more to see which is the scope. So for me, the scope is the progression and adaptation, as many others said in the previous point. So how to measure the progress? Well, in order to measure the progress, the spirit of the PA is very clear in terms of full scope. So is adaptation action, is adaptation support, are barriers, are lessons learned, are good practices, are case studies, experiences. So that's the kind of synthesis report that I would like to see from the AC. I would leave it for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pilar, for this useful contribution to and suggestion to keep the scope open, considering all the elements that are relevant for adaptation in a cross-cutting manner. I have Navina on my list now. Navina, please.
Thank you, Ale. I think this is, again, a good basis to start our work, and I would like to thank the Secretariat for preparing this report. One thing that struck my eye was under the same section 5 in the sources of input, the bullet H, fairness, etc., etc. I'm a bit puzzled why this is here, because the whole discussion of equity is not a discussion that we have in adaptation. My understanding, this discussion comes from mitigation. And if the Secretary could provide some background on the logic for having that point here, that would be great. Further, throughout the paper, we have some good things that could be looked into, like the NAP document, national communications, NDCs, etc. I think it's important to look at any source that does reporting on the implementation of Article 7.9 of the Paris Agreement. And along with what Pilar said of the issue, what happens when a country puts something in a document that is not in the scope of this? For instance, I can think of BURs. BURs are not documents intended to contain adaptation. However, 2 or 3 countries have included adaptation in the past by their own means and choice. So in those cases, the information on adaptation could be also regarded by this. And regarding the point that you raised, Pilar, on how to go about the information that is in 23C, I think for me, the way I would see it is that the mitigation parts of the NDC will be dealt by another unit of the Secretariat. And for us, due to the link to 13.8, then the adaptation parts of those countries that choose to have adaptation in documents, be it the NDC, be it another document, can be included analog to 13.8. That would be my understanding. I don't know if that provides some logic or not, but that's something where I'm very happy to continue those conversations, because I agree with you, Pilar, that information on adaptation should be added in the broader scope for all countries, and also here, as Kasim said, for all countries, also learning about the transmission of good practices, shared knowledge, etc. At the same time, I'm a bit puzzled as to how to go about with areas that are not covered by the Adaptation Committee. This would be for me all the means of implementation, because we do have the standing committee, the SCF, we have also the PCCB, we have the tech, etc., etc. So in the past, I have complained about others duplicating our work, and by the same token, I would not like to duplicate their work. So here I think we need to engage, perhaps initially through the co-chairs, through the normal conversations they have with the co-chairs of those groups, and later perhaps through us liaison people, and explore how to go about this. But I think information related to support should be dealt by the Standing Committee of Finance, information related to capacity building by PCCB, and on technology by tech. I find we can make references to their work, but I don't see much value in duplicating that at the moment. Thank you.
And thank you, Navina, and thank you for the suggestion of asking the co-chairs to engage with the other bodies to explore how synergies and overlaps, synergies can be exploited and overlaps could be avoided. I'd like the AC members to consider this suggestion as we continue this discussion. Perhaps I will ask the Secretariat to provide a little bit more information on how the elements in the table were drawn, responding to both Navina's and Pilar's suggestions and questions, if that's okay.
Thank you very much, Alessandra. And just to add that the elements are taken from paragraph 36. We took out those that we considered were obviously not within the scope of the AC, like the state of greenhouse gas emissions. We also took out loss and damage, thinking that would be covered by the EXCOM, but we didn't want to pass judgment on all the other bullets, but instead possibly leave that to the AC itself, depending on, of course, what the AC wants. Any of those bullets could either be brought in, could be taken out. It is completely up to the AC. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this clarification. Are there other comments or reactions from members of the Adaptation Committee at this stage?
Alexandra, may I? Clifford?
Clifford, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Co-Chair. Fully agree with the comments that were made. I agree with Navia that some parties have included adaptation in their biennial report, even though it's a mitigation report. So I would also take that suggestion to include that. But I think what we have is a good paper to start our work with, and I fully support doing that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Clifford, for the suggestion. Daniel, please, you have the floor, followed by Alice. Daniel?
Hi, good morning. Thanks. Just a quick point of clarification, just given my newness to the Adaptation Committee. And it seems like this is kind of clarified in the paper, but just for my own awareness. The elements of NDCs covered by the synthesis report mandated by the AC will cover those adaptation components and not mitigation. Those would be covered by a synthesis report by another group. Just appreciate some clarity on that. It'd be useful for me to understand. And then also just in looking through the sources of input, it's also my understanding that the Adaptation Committee hasn't covered in particular depth or had opportunity to have conversations about what's captured in 36H on fairness considerations. I'm not really sure how this would be captured in a way that's useful, productive to any kind of outcome, especially given the paucity in discussions among the AC on the topic. So I'd recommend removing that. I'm not sure exactly what the value add in this synthesis report would be. Thanks.
Thank you, Daniel, also for the concrete suggestions. Alice, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to add my voice to those thanking the Secretariat, and I think this is a very good starting point, and I will be very brief. So to the discussion about adding the scope or expanding the scope compared to what's in this table, or removing some items in the table, I guess that might be a part of the discussion with the other bodies that which the Secretariat has proposed in the next steps, that we should start liaising with the other bodies. So I guess that will be a part of that discussion. So I guess we won't sort of cast this table in stone during this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. Pilar, did you want to intervene again, please?
Yes, thank you, Alessandra. I'm sorry for coming back. It's just taking advantage of the opportunity, and I didn't see other people asking for the floor. So I would like to express on this regard in terms of the scope that this remind me a lot the exercise we made after Paris on the analysis of adaptation architecture, adaptation, the mapping of adaptation under the convention. I don't know if you remember that exercise. It was quite interesting for the AC to make. I remember in particular the maps and figures where we saw that even though there were some kind of overlappings in our work, and if you see that is very very simple to see in our work plan, because in the work plan you have a track on means of implementation. So we could think that that is an overlap with the standing committee or with the PCCB or with the tech. And for me, it's not an overlap. And the exercise that we made as AC was clearly in terms of saying this is not a problem. We have a different nature and a different mandate under the convention as a constituted body. For example, the standing committee see the whole picture of finance, but we can see a particular part of the picture that is focused on our mandate in terms of how to assist and provide advice, technical advice to parties in terms of adaptation. So for me, it's not an issue of overlapping here in this particular case. It's more an issue of adding layers that will be useful for a discussion where all voices should be heard. So it's more like that. It's not bad. And it will not be something bad for us to hear AC voice talking about adaptation finance. We could discover that it's we make similar comments with some of other bodies that.
Pilar, we have lost you.
Alessandra, it might be that she was kicked out from the system, so she needs to re-enter. In the meantime, probably you want to give the floor further to Funi, who's on the list.
Okay, that's great.
Can
I
you
hope
just wait for
Pilar
her?
will be able to
I will,
reconnect. So
I will
Funi,
see with
please.
her on the side.
Thank you very much, Ronit. Funi, please.
Thank you, Alexandra. I just wanted to say that I want to support what Pilar is saying now, that when we're looking at this synthesis report, it's not about what is specifically adaptation and what's not adaptation. Even if it's finance for adaptation, we should not be the judge to decide what goes in it. We can try and make it as detailed as possible so that we provide enough information to the GST. While I'm also new in the AC, this is my first meeting, but I know that from my experience from the negotiation, when we were discussing issues related to finance, our negotiators in the finance would want input from adaptation negotiators. And I think the same thing would also happen when we're preparing the synthesis report, that we also have to put issues related to finance, issues related to capacity building or technology that have linkages with adaptation. In that, I support that we can start thinking about how we collaborate with other bodies that would be preparing the synthesis report. We shouldn't just at this early stage. I think we just received these documents 3 days back. We now want to take away things and so forth. So I'll suggest that we keep everything as they are based on the decision from the Katowice on GST. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Funi. I don't know if Pilar is back on the line.
No, Alessandra, she's not back in the line, so it's Daniel's turn. Thank you.
Then Daniel, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And apologies. I'll be kind of speaking to some comments from Pilar and Funi, and I'm not sure if Pilar is on the line to hear me. But it's my understanding that the SCF has been mandated by the CMA to undertake this very large, very in-depth needs report, which will cover adaptation needs as well. I do see a role and contribution from the AC on the policy elements of support, particularly on data gaps and information gaps that might contribute to an understanding of needs. But as far as the particular synthesis and assessment of needs as they relate to adaptation, that work is being undertaken by the SCF. And it's my understanding that the AC has the opportunity to contribute to that process. So it makes sense to me for the AC to focus on the policy and technical elements, while the SCF focuses on the specific finance and support elements. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I don't think Pilar managed to reconnect in the meantime. So perhaps just to capture this last point and last discussion that was going on here before she joins back. From my understanding, I see that there are some members of the AC who would like to have a comprehensive assessment that also covers elements of means of implementation, which other members feel would be overlapping with the mandate of constituted bodies. You actually have the mandate to work on these means of implementation. I think there was a suggestion by some to keep the table open for the time being, while ensuring that as we move forward, we avoid any overlap and we make sure that the bodies prepare the summary, the synthesis report within their own mandate, and ask the co-chairs of the Adaptation Committee to reach out to the co-chairs of the Standing Committee of Finance, the Paris Committee on Capacity Building, and I'm sure I am missing, the tech for instance, to discuss with them what would be covered in their report. So I'd like to put this suggestion back to the AC members to see whether that could be an acceptable way forward that would preserve the positions of both and allow us to explore further this issue. Perhaps as you think about it, let me give a few, let me give the opportunity to the observers to comment and provide their input for the next few minutes, and then I will come back to AC members to ask for your views on this issue and how we want to move forward. And if Pilar manages to join us, she will have the floor again to continue and finish her intervention. Are there any observers? If there are no objections from AC members, and I don't see any, I would ask observers to signal if they would like to take the floor at this stage. I think everyone exhausted their brilliant ideas with the global goal on adaptation discussion, but I think there's many interesting elements that have been brought by AC members here. So maybe let me turn back to you briefly if any of you would like to intervene on my suggestions that co-chairs take this issue forward. Cecilia, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alessandra. I agree with the suggestion of do not take from the document what is in. This is the first draft. This is the first look we are giving. We still have time to work on the document. So I suggest and I agree to keep it and introduce what is being provided. And then we will have all opportunity then to reflect on what should remain and what should be taken from the document, just to support what was said by some of AC members. Thank you, Alessandra.
Thank you, Cecilia. Are there any other views on this matter? Daniel, please.
Going to comment specifically on the path forward, but just maybe in order to inform my thinking as before we move on or end today's discussion. If the Secretariat could maybe speak to what they intend to cover in the synthesis report with regard to paragraph 36H, it might be useful for me to understand if it really makes sense within the AC's scope of work and mandate to cover that. So if perhaps either co-chairs or Secretariat could speak to that, it would be very helpful for me.
Daniel, thank you very much. May I ask the Secretariat to provide the information? Thank you.
Thank you, Alessandra. To be honest, at this point, we haven't gone the next step to actually identify from which work of the AC to draw input. The similar, as it relates to fairness considerations, but also as it relates to all the other points. So there may come a point where either the AC provides the details of what to be covered or to decide that no, it would not be covered. I would also like to point out that, of course, besides these syntheses reports, there will be other sources of input for the global stocktake, and also given that there is quite an overlap, not just in the scope of the various syntheses reports done by the constituted bodies, but also in the four main syntheses reports. And as Pilar has pointed out, of course, the NDC synthesis report will have to cover adaptation once these NDCs also include adaptation components. So to aid some of the discussions, the chairs of the subsidiary bodies are preparing guiding questions for each phase of the global stocktake to also help focus the discussions. So I understand from our colleagues supporting the global stocktake that the SB chairs will reach out to the constituted bodies as well to discuss these guiding questions, to possibly provide additional focus, and in that context, to possibly also have a discussion between the AC, the SB chairs and other co-chairs to look at what could be covered by an AC synthesis report. So at this point, the table was a very initial first attempt at looking at what could be covered complementary to the secretariat report, but in no way was meant to be exhaustive, exclusive, or final. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this clarification. Navina?
I think there are some things where we members need to find agreement. Those things are, for instance, the question of adaptation finance. Some of us do not see it as a scope here, others do see it as a scope. So those things, I think it's okay to remain in the document at the moment until we find some consensus. However, for 36H, this is mitigation. This is about ICTU. In ICTU, countries have to explain why their mitigation target is fair and equative, etc., etc. So I do not see any reason for keeping 36H here. It's not even linked to adaptation in any way. So for me, I think a way I would feel more comfortable with is if we remove 36H, and then, as you said, that the co-chairs do some scoping with the other expert bodies and groups. I would hate to see the resources of the secretariat going to waste. They do an excellent work always supporting us, and they have very limiting resources. And I think with the global crisis at the moment, we need to be very cautious of how we use them. So until we have more clarity on the work of others, we can perhaps work with keeping those headlines so that everybody feels comfortable, but just not diving into content. That would be my suggestion on the way forward and how to navigate the way forward.
Thank you very much, Navina. Let me turn to AC members for reactions on your concrete suggestions on the way forward, if any, in particular in terms of removing the specific point from the table. Pilar, please.
Thank you, and I'm sorry that when it came back, I heard you, Alessandra, saying, okay, a concrete way forward, blah blah blah, and I didn't hear which is the way forward. So I have some pieces missing. Just to I don't know where I started to talk alone on the phone. It was just to raise very briefly that I really and respectfully think that we really need to have a full scope here. I will not pick and choose from the issues. The only issue that I understand is quite more mitigation oriented is A. All the other issues could be taken for consideration, and this is not the moment for deletion. I really prefer to have a first consideration and to see, as I said, leaving political issues behind in this case, to see which is the concrete approach that AC could make in each of the topic, B, C, D. So this is the way forward that I propose to ask the Secretariat to continue our deliberation in the intersessional period based on possible issues that could be included or not, or which is the concrete ideas that the AC can provide in the different issues for a full scope. And then if we together discover that there is nothing in terms of equity, so there we can remove equity. There we have time for removing equity, but I really think that if we check adaptation, the Paris Agreement, we will see that equity and CBDR, for example, are umbrella principles for the whole Paris Agreement. So it's already there. I understand what Navina said. I really get it, that the context of discussion of the relationship between mitigation and equity is clear in terms of history, let's say, but it doesn't prevent us for making the exercise. So my proposal is to make the exercise, and then of course we can remove. Thanks.
Thank you, Pilar. So I think there's still a divergence of view, but we have more time to discuss offline. I understand that many of you have already included their comments in the document in the collaborative space, and we will be taking forward this work in the course of this week and intersessionally. So I suggest in the interest of time, and as I'm sure in many places it's getting late, that we conclude the discussion for the time being, the live discussion for the time being now. Unless there are, do please signal if there are any burning issues that you would like to raise at this point. Otherwise, I would like to thank all of you for the very valuable input in this discussion, and encourage you to send and include further comments you might have triggered by the discussions that we are having now in the collaborative space. Please do so in track change mode and do make a concrete suggestion so that we can further consider concrete ideas in taking the paper forward. For those of you who may have issues in accessing the collaborative space, and for observers, please do send comments to the email of the secretariat, ac@unfccc.int. So before closing the session and building on some of the elements that we discussed, in particular on how to take forward the paper on the global goal on adaptation, I'd like to take note of the fact that we will need to continue and identify colleagues who might want to take forward specific work intersessionally. We also have many new members in the Adaptation Committee, which might mean we will need to identify new representatives, for instance, as liaison with other constituted bodies, or representatives of the AC in existing expert groups. I would then like to ask the Secretariat to circulate after this meeting to AC members a document containing all the relevant information, so that we can come back to this issue on Friday when we address the next step forward and identify specific AC members who would lead the work on specific topics. If that is an agreeable way forward to AC members, I don't see any requests for the floor, so I'd like to thank all of you and the Secretariat, and as well as the observer, for this very lively and interesting discussion. Cecilia, if you would like also to say a few words from your side. From my side, have a good day, evening, night, depending on your time zone, and I'll speak to you again tomorrow. It's been great. Thank you very much. Cecilia.
Thank you very much, Alessandra, and just to thank all the members and observers that joined the meeting today for the efforts we are doing, all of us, to be connected. So as you already said, the Secretariat will circulate an email, and then we all provide the feedback on the groups we will have to work in the different documents. Thank you all very much, and I see you tomorrow. Good night, good morning, and good afternoon, depending on your time zone. Thank you. Bye-bye.